One who has not been introduced, and Jim is with the Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy, as well as being a senior fellow with the Rockefeller Institute, and has done a considerable amount of work in this area. I'm going to ask one opening question, but I'm going to try to restrict my comments because this really is your time, and it's when the panels come together. It's when the experts get to talk together, and I'm going to encourage the panelists as well to engage each other. So this is not a linear conversation that takes place between the questioner and the questioned. Additionally, for the purposes of the video, I'm going to go ahead and repeat questions as well. So one question that we haven't really talked about the policy aspects of this very much, and Jim Fawcett, I'm going to start with you, and that is this a bipartisan issue? And if so, is it because by validating the fact that there is a problem, do you get into the whole political quagmire of having to similarly validate climate change?
In Washington, this is a problem. I mean, it's no secret that there's a lot of opposition to the whole idea of climate change in Congress, particularly in the House, and you heard Congressman Tonko talk about that. My sense is that in a lot of the affected areas, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, this really isn't an issue where there's any serious political debate. I mean, listening to the stories that we heard on the last panel, it's a little hard to say, well, yeah, we've had three major hurricanes in 3 years and 19 disaster declarations, but no, there's no problem. I mean, I think what there's not going forward is a real sense yet of how to deal with this. I mean, I think there are a lot of people with different ideas about what we should be doing, and I don't think there's any clear consensus yet. And we're blessed, cursed, whatever, with a kind of a governmental decision-making process that's extremely fragmented. You know, this is a regional issue that affects a lot of us in very different kind of ways, but it's also a home rule state. Which means a lot of the control over building codes and land use and zoning that are kind of going to be critical to devising a sensible long-term solution are really split up. And dealing with this problem is going to require a lot of cooperation and a lot of collaboration between a lot of different governments. And while Chris was able to get 117, was that the number, to come to his aid right after the disaster and respond to the immediate emergency, that level of cooperation, unfortunately, is unlikely to last into the recovery, and much less trying to do what Colleen told us we need to do and get out ahead of things going forward. So it's going to be a long-term process.
And to the other two questioners, Chris, as a meteorologist or as somebody who studies weather, how frustrating is it for you to see the direction of the political debate?
Well, there's two issues. Well, there's probably more than two, but two big issues on the table here. One is climate change, and that's extremely disappointing that politics complicates the debate. It halts the debate, it's interfering with progress on how to deal with carbon budgets, etc. So that's very frustrating as a scientist. I mean, there are facts out there showing that climate change has been affected by humans, and it's very frustrating to me that parties disagree on those facts, choose to not ignore the facts. It's not a belief system, it's just ignoring the facts. Where I'm more optimistic is actually on the weather timescale, because it's clearly, we're having to deal with the impacts of severe weather, disasters, and that's where politics there may be more agreement. I think there was a bill that came out, was agreed last week on, improving infrastructure for weather prediction. and support for that. So dealing with a problem that is becoming increasingly a problem, there could well be political agreement on that, and that's just dealing with the disasters, improving our ability to predict weather and river flow. So that's frustrating that we can't deal with the big problem, which is climate change, but I'm more optimistic about the weather side, dealing with the problem as it develops. I mean, it's...
Kevin, the same question asked from your perspective, although you may have a more positive response, because if you take a look at the history of the state, somebody's barn burned down, there was a barn raising and neighbors came to the aid of neighbors.
Right.
So is the answer counties pulling together to assist each other where there are gaps in policy, or is the answer to create better policy?
There's a couple, let me answer that in a couple different ways. First of all, I think the key word here is fear, and I think really what it is people are fearful that the climate actually is changing. If that happens to be the case. The second issue is from the political side of it, people are afraid to upset the apple cart, because when a person goes up to the local planning board in the community and says, hey, my son bought this piece of property over here, and he'd really like to settle into town where the family's been for generations and such, and they look at the map and they say, geez, it's in the floodplain. Well, so, and you go to your zoning board and you get a variance to overrule that decision of the planning board, and goes ahead and builds the house in the floodplain. So they're afraid of upsetting things from that perspective, of losing a tax base, of upsetting a long-term family issue or something of that nature. The second issue to that point of it is that spins us all the way around to the fact that we don't want to lose, again, the same perspective of fear, the resources. So we develop this constant, in the western end of the state, we have developed this, not a consortium, but an incident management team that responds to each other's needs across the state, so that we can always rely on the resources. Well, I might not have them in Livingston County, but I know where I can get them in the other 13 counties in western New York. So that development of strength is something that's coming along regardless of the political environment that's out there, whether they pass a piece of legislation or not. We have, and we constantly are being judged, and only judged by one individual, and that is the community, the people that we serve. Those are the ones that judge us. So we got to continue to move forward to make sure that we respond to them in the appropriate manner and as quickly as we can with all the resources appropriate. So you start to see these developments internally, and that's what emergency management at the county level is building. We're resourceful at that venture.
Okay, at this point, I want to open it up to the floor. So Kate was asking a question about what other states are doing or could do. And in particular, she highlighted something that I was really looking forward to hearing from Chris and Jim about, and that is what potentially could the role in higher education be to help make us smarter, to make better informed decisions?
Well, I'm a huge opinion. I'm hugely supportive of more education on the climate change and extreme weather agenda. I think scientists and academics need to do much more than they have done in the past. And we tend to shy away, and some people tend to hide in their ivory towers, but I think it's awful. It's an awful thing to do. We're members of society, and our voice should be heard and should be respected. I remember a colleague of mine telling me that if you have a brain tumor, you go and see a doctor about it, right? If you have a question about climate change, you really should talk to somebody that knows about climate change and not somebody who has just their own opinion. So I'm firmly of the belief that academics need to be getting out there and talking to everyone, members of the public, teachers. And I know there are people out there that are doing it, but I think more and more academics need to get out there and do that. I know why they don't, because they're not used to doing that type of thing, and they're not good at talking to the media, and they don't give the questions, they don't answer the media the way the media want them to answer the questions. But it's a coward's way out not to do it. We should be trying to do more of it. So I also believe that we should be working with teachers, K through 12. I'm from England, if you hadn't noticed, and I asked my cousins, my nieces who are 18 years old, did you hear about climate change at school? And they go, every course, every lesson. So they know about climate change, and that's not the case. That doesn't happen here.
Just to respond to Kate's question. There is a lot of experience with sort of relocating towns in floodplains, mainly in the Midwest. You know, there are a lot of towns along the Mississippi that have gotten moved. Unfortunately, as somebody said earlier, the problem is recovery is well funded and mitigation is not. So FEMA will pay virtually without limit to give you back exactly what you had where you had it. Mitigation is much less well funded. You have to separately apply for it, and there's just not that much money there. But I completely endorse what Chris said about sort of the climate scientists getting much more out in front of the debate. It's one thing to have somebody sitting in London or wherever they're sitting, coming out with these huge volumes that say climate change is a problem. It's another thing to having our own local expert getting up in front and saying, look, here's what we're looking at.
I believe there's another question over here. Well, the question related to some untouched subjects here this afternoon, and I'm going to read from my script for a moment. I won't read, I'll paraphrase, but I will say this, that this is our first attempt at this, the first time that we came together with our scientific colleagues from the Department of Atmospheric and Environmental Sciences. We know that we did not do a perfect job here today. We know that this area is so vast that we've only begun to touch upon it. And so what I was going to say is that we are going to repeat this. This is going to be done again. And that there are areas that we perhaps are not more familiar with. And I would like to invite anyone who would like to help make our second and our subsequent sessions better to come up and talk to us at the conclusion of this program and share with us your ideas so that we can make a more informed program, or a series of more informed programs that will be of greater benefit to this audience and other audiences. Thank you for your point, sir.
Can I have a comment on that?
Please, Kevin.
To your point, sir, I'd like to, a couple things. In regards to, this is a great opportunity for partnership here. You talked about stream and stream bank management. As I was looking around the room, I noticed Ag and Markets is here, Department of Health, and many other disciplines are here. Engaging Ag and Markets in the Farm Service Agencies and the Natural Resource Conservation Services, we've done that in Livingston County along with DEC. We have a very aggressive stream bank management plan, as well as gravel and shoal removals at certain periods of time so they don't disrupt different species that are in the streams. We also have a very aggressive stream bank management in regards to replanting and regrowthing trees and shrubs. In one case, through the town of Nunde and the village of Nunde on the Kashaqua Creek, we have a hiking trail that has some beautiful flora that comes out because of that management. So I think what needs to be done in the future is you need to embrace more partners to bring this to fruition. There's more people that have a role to play here, all right, than who spoke today. Yes, not citing that, you know, climatology and stuff are not important, but so isn't building codes. Department of Health is important. Ag and Markets is important. DEC is important. All of these we have to partner with and create that foundation to build from, and one can build off of each other.
So this is our first foray, not our last. The question relates to when are we going to stop, and Stephen Lebo had made this point earlier, when are we going to stop defining this problem from an historical perspective and start to take a look at it from a forecasting, well, we certainly do forecasting, but using our weather data and climatological data to be more forward-looking. And Chris, I think that's probably a good question for you to start with.
Well, I think it's more of a policy issue, because as scientists we can attempt to do that. So the question is, are the politicians going to react to it? Are the insurers or the FEMA boundaries going to change? So as scientists, that we could monitor this and update it as we go along with more data and more understanding. But I haven't got a clue how the policy would be affected by that.
Well, I think you can get a clue to that by looking at the reaction to Biggert Waters, which was Act passed in 2011 that raised flood insurance rates for a lot of people to what was market level. And there was an immense amount of screaming, and with the result that, as Congressman Tonko noted, Biggert Waters essentially got repealed by a very large bipartisan vote in both houses of Congress, and so it's gone. Said you essentially left everything in place for 4 years. Now, this is an election year, and you have to take allowances for that. But this is going to, I think, show you where the rub is, because people don't want to be told they're living in a floodplain, and because they don't want to be told they have to elevate their house or pay very high flood insurance rates. And that's part of what's going to be tough going forward, is finding a way that politicians can make majorities by telling people that.
Chris, before we get off the topic, President Jones referenced Mesonet, and we haven't talked about it in any great detail, and I know that there's still much yet to be released, but can you give us a sense of what we're going to see from Mesonet and what an approximate timetable is?
Well, this is a 3-year project, build-out project, but one of the motivations for the build-out of the Mesonet is the recognition of gaps in the weather observing system that currently New York State has to live with. We have, I think it's 27 so-called ASOS sites, which are run by the FAA with the weather forecast officers. And there are huge gaps, even in for the cases of the Irene case, there are a number of reputable station data that had very record rainfalls measured, which were received a week after the event. The Adirondacks is not well covered by a substantial rain gauge network. So there are real problems in the observing system. And I know this is just one part of the problem. It's a multi-dimensional problem, but in terms of the risk management. But the weather is the input to the problem, so we want to get that right. So we are going to be building 125 weather stations. As I said before, we will be measuring rainfall at each one of those stations, as well as normal other meteorological variables. We'll be measuring soil moisture, which is an important parameter if you want to monitor flood risk, especially flash flood risk. So we're going to be building this out. Every county will have at least one weather station in those counties. We're strategizing at the moment about where to actually locate these sites, and we're working with the 5 regional weather forecasters office as well as Homeland Security in siting these sites. In addition to the weather stations, we're also going to have a number of profiling stations which actually measure the atmosphere up into the vertical, which is important information if you want to monitor icing problems as well as numerical weather prediction. So the plan is to provide this data in real time. You'll have all of this data in real time. It's a sort of 1 minute, 5 minute observation, and you'll receive it in 1 minute, 5 minute time scale. So this will be something that you would maybe have on your app, and you can see how much it's raining at a particular station near you, for example. So real-time data will help, hopefully, decision-making in the field. We're also going to be enhancing maps across the state to give you much better resolution of where it's raining, but also, even in we didn't talk about winter storms very much, but the difference between rain and snow, for example, will be much better monitored and in real time to make decisions about, you know, where are the roads going to be icier, where is it snowing, where is it raining. But also, this data is also going to feed numerical weather prediction models, and so the aim is to improve weather prediction, especially on this 1 to 6 to 12 hour time range when you're making decisions in the field. So those forecasts will be higher resolution, they'll be made more frequently to serve this, to serve these decision making in the field. It's just one part, it's just one, I know it's a complicated problem you were talking about, you know, it involves lots of different people, how you react in a time of emergency, but the weather, if we can make improvements to monitoring and weather prediction in the state, including the whole state, filling the gaps that we currently have, I think this will be a huge service to reducing the risk of property and people's health.
And timetable?
This is going to be a 3-year build-out. You don't build 125 water stations in a day. It's a substantial effort. So by the end of 3 years, this will be, and while we're building it, data will come online, and we'll be communicating that as we go along. So 3-year build-out towards the end.
Thank you. Steve, I think that's a really good point. This is David Gibson from Adirondack Wild. Many of you are familiar with their work. They do fantastic work, and he talks about the devastation, particularly in the King Valley area and along the west branch of the Ausable, who in the weeks and months afterwards did just tremendous work, just in terms of volume of work, to try to get themselves back on track, mitigate any potential near-term disaster. But then the question, and then followed on by a point that Dave was making, is by making taking fast action, did they potentially leave themselves open for problems down the road? And David is pointing to the importance of the need to discuss cooperation at all levels. And I'm assuming, Dave, you probably mean also to include higher education and academia and the research community as well, so that the decisions can be very well informed. Thank you for that point. Any other questions? Yes, sir. That's wonderful to hear. Here's another example of one local emergency response organization working with both primary schools and also the higher education community to do both education and try to do some planning. And I can't think of a better use for our colleges, universities, and also our schools. So thank you for doing that. Any final questions? I think this will be the last question. Sir. Well, the point that was made, and I think I'm going to turn to Kevin on this one, is do many people who live in a floodplain have a true understanding of what can happen as a result of the location of their home? We've talked a lot about historic home locations, and I think that for those people who are already presently located, I think about Route 9N as you move towards Upper J and the area down around Keene, and just how badly flooded those areas were. They were up away from the river, but they never had any sense of just what the volume of water was going to be, certainly in Elizabethtown too. And so, Kevin, what do we do about that? What do we do to ensure that people have that clear understanding?
From the couple things, and I just want to go back to David's point and the gentleman in the back that just spoke a few minutes ago in regards to the education process. The education process is for the citizens, but also too, as we build a partnership with other agencies, that education process to educate those agencies are the same, as well as the emergency managers have to be educated. Now, we've seen the devastation before. Other individuals that live in the floodplain may have not. And so they've got to have you got to get them to grasp the concept that this actually could happen to them. And so the whole crux of this matter is that educational piece that seems to be a very difficult one, I think, from a perspective of development. I can show them photographs. You know, this is what happened there, this is what happened here, here's the history of this area and things like that. But again, there's a couple things: home rule state, okay, policies. I got a variance from the zoning board, you know what I mean? Been here 3 generations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all weigh into it. I think that when we go forward with this process, the one factor of the education piece has got to be the life safety issue, okay? That's where it has to start with. Now, sometimes we do some reactionary things, such as, you know, putting a dozer in the creek or something to move something. And the impact is not just to get the stream channel moving again, it's probably from a life safety issue. And yeah, sometimes it might not have been the right thing, but you still have to do that from a life safety, so it needs to focus there. And then intertwining all the other disciplines to educate each other on the process. It's frustrating to get people to comprehend what it could do to them in that floodplain.
Gentlemen, any final thoughts before we close?
I think the theme of this discussion actually has been education. So I would like to take that up in the future, maybe even working with people in this audience. From my perspective, if there's perceived to be a need for people to come and brief or give talks or do more Q&As in smaller groups, I'd be supportive of that activity. So certainly in climate change, extreme weather, education is the key, I think, is a key component of this.
Yeah, just, you know, to endorse that, people tend to have a short time horizon about these things, and they don't want to hear this is going to happen again. They want to get their house fixed, move on with their lives. And so keeping this issue and this perspective on the public agenda, on the political agenda, and getting more attention in the media besides just look at this devastation. Okay, it's 3 years after the devastation. Mayor Smith is still fighting with FEMA about it. That ought to tell you something about how this process goes. So I think this kind of more attention to it, keep it in people's minds before the next one hits, and not just when it hits.
Kevin, any final thoughts?
As the president of NYSEM of the New York State Emergency Managers Association, I'd like to thank Bob and Rockefeller Institute for allowing us the opportunity as emergency managers. Hopefully we gave you some insight to the different side of the coin, or the other side of the world that we see on a day-to-day basis, because, you know, we live in those communities, we're friends with those people, we know their families and such, and to face that devastation and give everything that we can to help them. Their expectations are extremely high, so thank you for the opportunity to share the stories and such like that we went through. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, from panel 1, we learned about the dedication of those people who are studying weather every day. From panel 2, we learned a number of things. Colleen challenged us to think outside the box and to work together, and I don't think there could be a more appropriate lesson to come out of today. And Chris talked to us about just what happens when you do just that. And the mayor actually talked to us about the heroism that you see every day from the emergency management community. You know, it's interesting, as we were talking to Congressman Tonko before the start of today's presentation, we were talking about this spring. We were talking about this weather. While folks are walking down their streets in shorts today and polo shirts in the second week of April, thinking that 74 degrees is how it should be from this point forward, the folks who live downstream from the Tug Hill Plateau are wondering what's going to happen, because they're sitting there with a 3-foot snowpack, and it's going to let loose pretty soon. And the folks who live downstream on the Mohawk and downstream on the Hudson. And so to those people who themselves are emergency managers, or those who support them, through their work. I say God bless you, and we hope that we have a good spring. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you have found this information useful. Thank you. As a public service to the people of the great state of New York, Chris and Jim and I have been talking, and we're going to do some form of this program again next year, if not sooner. And we're going to try to give you the most current information that we have, and we're going to try to put your ideas into play so that we are filling some of the gaps that the gentleman mentions, and we're giving you the best opportunity to live healthy lives that are free of trouble, or as free as you possibly can be. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the people who have really put this together. My colleague, Dr. Jim Fawcett, Dr. Chris Thorncroft, Kevin Niedermeyer, and Pete Finn, also from Rockefeller College. Can they stand and be recognized? I'd also like to acknowledge the office of Dr. Jim Diaz, Vice President for Research here at the University of Albany, and members of his staff for their wonderful work in preparation for this event. And finally, I'm going to ask to recognize Patty Cadrette, Joe Chamberlain, Michael Cooper, Michelle Charbonneau, and Heather Stone from our staff who have been here since early today putting this together. And actually, Joe, raise your hand because it's his birthday today, and he gave it up to be with you folks here today. This concludes our forum. Thank you for your kind attention. We look forward to seeing you again soon.